Hey everybody, I hope you're doing well today. I just wanted to take a second to invite you to check out my new project, bradcartwright.com. I have created a resource for you as you head to the May 2020 exams. If you're an IB student, an AP student, head on over to bradcartwright.com where you will find video lessons, notes, slides, key terms, practice questions, and other key components to make you feel good before you go to bed before the test, all right? So head to bradcartwright.com, create a new free account. You don't need a credit card to create the account. Check out the free previews and use the coupon code May2020 to receive a discount. And just to give you an idea of what it's like over there, check out the following video. Welcome to this course on development economics. And development economics is, I think, the most fascinating segment of all your studies of economics because it talks about the real true interactions and the intentions and the reasons why developed nations would interact with lesser developed nations and why less developed nations would be interested in interacting with developed nations. It's at the core, I think, of actual humanity and trying to figure out what are the characteristics of a developing nation that would attract investment or attract aid or attract grants from developing nations and vice versa. Like, what are the kinds of things that developing nations need to have in order to compete in the world economy as we see it today? So this course, your studies of development economics, is going to really expand your understanding of why it is, or there's a McDonald's in so many different parts of the world. Why is there Nike all over the world? Why is there Adidas all over the world? Why are US car manufacturers and Japanese car manufacturers the largest sellers of cars the world over? What were their reasons for getting involved in the economy of Nicaragua? What were their reasons for getting involved in the economy of Chile, where I live? All of that is encapsulated in this course, so welcome. In this video, I also want to talk about and differentiate some very important concepts. And right away, we've got to get comfortable with the difference between economic growth and economic development, okay? Economic growth and economic development. Economic growth is critical for development, okay? And I'm going to provide us with some nice definitions to start off here, but I just basically want you to realize that an economy cannot develop, a country cannot develop economically without having growth first, okay? So this course starts off taking a look at economic growth, and we can understand why that happens, and then we investigate what kind of development and why development follows that, okay? So economic growth, what is it? Just to have clarity in your mind. Economic growth is simply a measurement of the change in a country's national output or gross domestic product. That's it. Up or down, okay? It can be economic growth going up, and it can actually be negative growth if the country's economy actually contracts, okay? This could also be referred to as gross national income. Those are two different ways of measuring the same thing, okay? But economic growth does not say very much about the actual welfare of the people in a country, which is why I say in development economics, like, your heart just comes alive. Because we're not talking about just like growth. Yeah, you know, more GDP, more GDP, no, more GDP. No, that's the way economists used to judge like the success of an economy was just in growth. But there's so much more to it. And the studies of development economics take a look at economic development and with that expand our knowledge of actually how are those people really doing in that country? Are they better off now than they were before? And if some of them are and some of them aren't, why? So development economics gets to our heart. It gets to the human side of economic activity, okay? So a formal definition of economic development is a measure of welfare, a measure of the well-being of a country. Isn't that so nice? Like, how are people doing? Yeah, okay, sure, economic growth happens and many people and some people do get wealthy. And yes, it does create jobs for the working class people. But what about their standard of living? What about their living standards? Like, is it better or worse off with growth? That's what we look at, okay? So economic development, as opposed to just looking at GDP, is measured not just in monetary terms, such as GDP, but also in other indicators such as health indicators, education indicators, and social indicators. So it would look at things like, you know, what percentage of the population has a primary school education? What percentage of the population has a secondary school or university level education? What are the health indicators? Well, maybe those would be things like life expectancy or infant mortality. And social indicators is just a even softer way of just looking at, like, how do people in a particular country feel about their country? Are they happy? You know, are they happy? I mean, we all expect from economic growth or an increase in income of all people in a society that people are going to be happier, but that's not necessarily the case, okay? And so while economic growth is measured by GDP, there's something called the Human Development Index, or HDI, which is one of the most commonly used tools to measure development, okay? Just like a thermometer would measure your temperature if you're feeling sick, economic growth is measured by GDP, and we use the Human Development Index to measure economic development, okay? So that's pretty critical, yeah? Because when we're talking about economic development, we are talking about an improvement in the welfare of a nation, right? But it's not just like, it's multidimensional. There's so much to development. There's so many aspects of it, because in every society, you're going to have wealthy people, you're going to have working class people, you're going to have a middle class, hopefully, if you're an expanding economy. And so development is about also increasing people's freedoms. It's about reducing poverty. It's about the public provisions of education, healthcare, and law and order. It's about the guarantee of civil liberties and opportunities for civic participation. It is really critical that you understand that economic development brings with it an increase in education levels. And with an increase in education levels, guess what? You get an increase in demand for freedoms, like real freedoms. If you look at the countries around this world that are, quote, the most free, they have the highest level of education. That's really interesting, right? So there's an old adage that I came up with years ago, is that, like, education is what undermines autocratic rule more than anything else. Because a well-educated society will demand, by the nature of them understanding the history of humanity and understanding places beyond their home, that they're humans and they deserve certain amounts of rights, right? Human rights and human opportunities that are inherent in being alive. And economic development brings that into the equation, right? It's super, super cool, okay? So there's, like, the sort of the introduction to economic growth and economic development. And I hope you realize, like, what you're gonna do is really have some tools to look around the place on this earth where you live and make some really informed judgments, really informed analyses, really informed evaluations, okay? So this is what's really cool, like, economics really comes alive in development economics. In order to help us do that, it's going to take 2 more minutes here and talk about a strategy that I put forward in my teachings of IB Economics here in Santiago, Chile. And that is, I developed, for development economics, this notion of something I call the lists, okay? The lists are your key to understanding development economics. And what they are is a methodology. I made this up. A methodology for you to remember information as you go through your course of studies in development economics, okay? So what do I mean? Well, the thing is, if you think back to studies of microeconomics, macroeconomics, international economics, and maybe you took those courses here at the Econ School, there were, in each one of those areas of study, there are diagrams. Diagrams, the basic supply and demand diagram, the basic aggregate demand, aggregate supply diagram, the free trade diagram, in theory of the firm, geez, there's the profit diagrams, right? All of those actually in your mind create a framework or an organizational chart for you to remember information. In development economics, it doesn't exist, because apart from the occasional use of maybe a microeconomic diagram, supply and demand diagram, this is really soft information, which makes sense because, yeah, well, we're talking about humanity here, right? So I came up with this idea of creating lists. And a nice little analogy I have is like, just imagine your closet and there's a bunch of clothes in there. And that's it, right? And well, if you have a closet with no closet rod, all you're gonna have is a pile of clothes and there's no organization. But if you put the closet rod in there, then you have a place to organize your shirts, maybe your shorts, maybe your pants, but organize your clothes so that when you come to study, or you don't come to study with the clothes, but when you come into your closet, you know what's there. And so the lists provide that organizational chart, okay, for you to remember information as you go through this course, okay? So it's the structure. And so what you will see in the notes that are associated with each one of the videos as we go along here is a set of lists. And those lists are things that I think are really easy for you to remember. And as a result of you remembering them, you're going to remember the finer details of them. Just like if you think about a supply and demand diagram, there's a lot going on those diagrams, but the diagram itself actually are cues or clues to help you remember. So in this course, in the notes, you will see these lists, and those lists are meant to help you have a structure to organize your notes, okay? So I hope you find that methodology helpful. The students that I've taught here in Santiago and IB Economics have really enjoyed them because it all of a sudden gives them very clear context of what they're responsible for. Because lastly, in development economics, you really have to think about each chapter or each unit that we go through in this course as a recipe, as different pieces of a recipe as we build towards like baking a cake. So as we look into the first unit, we're kind of looking at the flour, then we'll be looking at the sugar, then the eggs, maybe the oil, and then maybe some flavoring on top of it. And if you look at them individually, they don't look like much. But as they all go into the bowl and you mix them up and you put them in the oven, it turns into something beautiful. And development economics is like that. You gotta just say, okay, yeah, I'm just learning one component, and then in the end, boom, you'll get it, okay? And in that point, then you'll be fully informed to write the kinds of analysis and evaluations that you will need to be successful on whatever assessment you are taking, okay? So thank you for being here. Welcome to this journey, and let's get started.